Okay, so let's continue with the fossils in the lab. And we had just left off with the fossil fern, which is right here. So let's continue. The next one we'll do is this one here, coded F10. And this one is another brachiopod. Different shape than F9, but both brachiopods. This one has an indentation that's very common in brachiopods, but they don't all have that. But they are all asymmetrical. And if I take this brachiopod and I turn it, we could see the seam where the two shells would meet. Maybe I'll try to zoom in on that a little bit. But right here where my pen is the seam between the two shells. And then it comes down like this, where that indentation is, and then it continues across. The top shell is different than the bottom shell. That's what we mean by asymmetrical. If we look at it from the side here, it might look more symmetrical, but when we look at it this way, the top shell is definitely different than the bottom shell. Okay, here it is viewed from the top. This back part here is called the hinge. That's where the two shells meet, and there's a hinge of ligament type tissue that holds the shell open, and the shell would open on this end. And again, these creatures are filter feeders. They're marine creatures. They would basically suck in water, suck in ocean water, filter out any nutrients, and then expel the excess water out another part. So this is another brachiopod. Hundreds of different species of brachiopod, different shapes. This is again mineral replacement. And again, you can do your drawings on a separate piece of paper. And if you have access to a printer, you could just print this out too. You could also scan it and upload it too if you wanted to do that. All right, let's do the next one. Next one we'll take a look at is F18. F18 is one that kind of looks like a rock. And to an untrained eye, if you didn't know any better, you would probably just walk right by this and not think anything of it. But if we look at it carefully, what we can see is different colors. We have some areas that are brown and some areas that are black. And this is actually a fragment of bone. So it's a broken piece of bone from a dinosaur, actually. So this one is actually dinosaur bone. And you might be asking yourself, well, how on earth could that possibly be bone and maybe bone from a dinosaur? But let's take a look at it. So this is dinosaur bone. Again, we have mineral replacement. That's how many fossils form. And if you've ever broken a bone, like a chicken bone or any kind of bone, what you'll see is a lot of holes. The bone is full of holes inside. Bones are not solid. If bones were solid, they would weigh a lot more. So bones are full of holes, and inside those holes would be where the blood flows, where there would be bone marrow and such. So in this case, the light brown material is the actual bone material, and then the black part is where all those little holes have been filled in. Let me get another sample to kind of explain this a little bit better. I'll be right back. Okay, so here I've got a large fossil bone, and we'll take a look at this bone more in a later video when we look at mammals. But this is a fossil bone from an ancient bison. It's a leg bone, and here we can see the joint. And we'll talk about this more later. But if we take a close-up look at the bone and the bone structure, maybe right at the end here, and I'm hoping that you can make out, especially over here, it's kind of a porous structure. Bone is actually porous. It's got a lot of holes in it. Let's see if we can see that better in other places. Bone is full of holes. Here's a part on this leg bone where it's been broken. And if we look at this spot here where this crack is, or this break, we can see lots of holes. So bone is typically very porous. It's full of many holes. We'll look at this large leg bone in another video. But the point is, bone is full of holes. And in the case of this dinosaur bone fragment, all those holes have been filled in with some other mineral. I'm not sure exactly what the mineral is, but something else. Okay, so anyway, this is a piece of dinosaur bone. This is an incomplete bone. It's just a little broken fragment. So we're not, we can't really tell even what dinosaur this is from. We can't really tell what bone this was. This is just a completely broken little fragment here. Okay, let's do the last two. So here we have F6. I'm just going to get that dust off. This is fossil F6. These two are the same thing. These are smaller fossils, so the number is on the box I just took them out of here. Okay. But anyway, we have these kind of round-shaped fossils. These are both the same thing. And here we can see basically a stack of circles, these circles. So here we have these kind of donut-shaped discs, and if we stack those discs up, we have the cylinder-shaped fossil here. This is the stem of a crinoid, and we looked at some pictures of crinoids in another video. Again, this would be mineral replacement. And you should have your drawings. So this is the stem of a crinoid. If you don't remember what a crinoid is, you could go back to one of the other videos on fossils. But a crinoid lived in the sea. It would be anchored to the seafloor. It had a stem, a head. It was an animal, and it had tentacles. And it would wait for some tasty piece of food to drift into its tentacles and then eat it. Okay, let's take a look at F14, which is the last one. F14 is related to F6, and that's why I had them together. Now, if we look at this fossil here, this is the head of the crinoid. So here's a crinoid again, but this is the head piece, or the calyx. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about these crinoids is that they're in the same family as starfish echinoderms, which means that they have a 5-point body symmetry. And if we look at the shape of the head of the crinoid from the top down, we see a pentagon, 5 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So crinoids have a 5-point symmetry to them somewhere within their body, just like starfish have 5-point symmetry. Okay, so anyway, these are different fossils, but they represent the same animal. If that's a little confusing, if the animal were alive, it would be on the seafloor with a stem. The head would be attached to the stem, and then coming off of the head would be tentacles. And it would basically just live on the seafloor, waiting for tasty things to drift into its tentacles and then eat it. Okay, so that takes care of the fossil portion of the lab. And again, that's mineral replacement. Now let's take a look at the third part of the lab. And we might need to do another video on this portion, but we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to flip the page over. And we have a cross-sectional diagram. And if we follow procedure C, it says to identify each of the fossils shown in the outcrop. We have fossil 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what I want to do is show you actual pictures of what fossils 1, 2, 3, and 4 are, and then we'll finish out this lab. So the first one is a fossil of essentially something like a clam called a pelycoderm. And if we take a look at the numbers here, it says 2/3 X. That basically means that this fossil is 2/3 the size of its actual size. If we go to fossil 2, which is a foraminifera, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, it's got 10x next to it, which means this drawing is actually 10 times larger than the actual fossil. Here we have a brachiopod at 1x, which means this is the actual size of the fossil. And then here we have another fossil called Annularia, which is a type of plant, and it's at 2/3 x, which means it's 2/3 its original or actual size. And we can see we have them layered in a sedimentary sequence. Let's take a look at these fossils in more detail, and then in another video we'll talk about Part C, Procedure C, and what to do with that. So let's look at some actual pictures. I don't have these actual fossils or these specific ones, but let's look at some fossils, some pictures. So here's fossil 1 in the sequence. This is the Palicoderm. Let me go backwards, a little slow. There we go, Palicoderm, or Palicopod. Basically a gastropod or type of clam. 2 shells, we call these bivalves, bi meaning 2. Valve would be the shell. So we have 2 shells. Filter feeder, sucks in water, extracts the nutrients, expels the excess water. The second fossil is one that you're probably less familiar with. These are called foraminifera, or sometimes people call them forams for short. You can see they're very, very small. Here they are on this coin to give you a sense of size. So they're small creatures. They form these little seashells, but they're actually protists, which means they're not really animals, they're not plants, they're not fungi. If you remember last year, you learned about those 5 kingdoms of life. Protists are in their own group. They're not plants, they're not animals, so they're not the same as clams or mollusks. They're their own group, but they do make little shells, or sometimes people call these tests. So the fossil 2 is a foraminifera. Fossil 3 is a brachiopod, and we talked about brachiopods several times now. Bivalve, 2 different shells. Again, asymmetry. So we can see that seam where the 2 shells meet, and the top half of the shell is very different from the bottom half of the shell. And the fourth fossil, Annularia, is a type of plant. Here's a picture of the fossil. A lot of people, when they look at this, think it's a flower. Flowers had not evolved at the time of Annularia. So it isn't actually a flower. Flowers hadn't existed yet. And what we're seeing actually, here's a modern day horsetail or similar type of plant. And we can see that the plants, they're not exactly true leaves either, but they grow in a circular pattern. And that's what we're seeing in the fossil here. So it might look like a flower, but it isn't truly a flower. Flowers had not evolved yet at the time that this organism lived. So we're seeing, these are primitive plants related to like club mosses, not true flowers or anything like that. And we're seeing that I'm hesitating calling them leaves because they're not really truly leaves even, but they are in a circular pattern. And then when the plant died, it left this circular impression in the sediment. So not flowers, even though they look like flowers. And that's fossil 4, the Annularia. So I'm going to stop here, and then I'll make a third and final video on how to finish up with the lab.